Man, have you guys ever noticed how all of us, and I mean really all of us, at different times, we can be really hurtful and mean and condescending and sometimes downright vicious to the people that we love the most, especially when we're hurt, when we're mad, when we're upset about something. But I got to tell you guys, hurtful words build massive resentment, and they really only compound this attitude of contempt that builds towards your spouse. Welcome to the Legacy Driven Marriages podcast, episode number 53. I'm Walt McKinley, and I'm here with my beautiful wife and my partner in crime, Stephanie McKinley.
Hey, everybody.
Man, get ready, you guys. I'm so excited about this. Stephanie and I were really talking about what's coming up next for the podcast. Where do we want to focus? And we decided to do a 4-part series on toxic and harmful communication habits that are ruining your marriage. Today, we're in part 1, so make sure that you're subscribing so that you can get the next 3 parts. And we're going to focus on what contempt in a relationship looks like. And I got to tell you, after 24 years, there's been times Stephanie and I have acted with contempt towards each other. So we want to talk about what is it, how does it show up in your relationship, and give you guys some real world examples of what we say to each other in these different points of contentment that we have. And then how do you actually reverse the direction of your relationship when you're in this cycle of acting with contempt towards each other? So make sure that you listen to this whole thing. Make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. We'd love to have you here, and we want to keep you here so that you don't miss an episode, and share this out with somebody who you know may need this conversation too. Because I know for me, especially when I looked at some of these examples, I know for me, I'm inclined to go to a couple of these things that we're going to talk about immediately when I'm frustrated or hurt, or just maybe just like being a little pissed off and petty sometimes too.
Yeah, I was going to say it shows up the most, I think, when we feel hurt.
Or
Either
unheard.
angry, hurt, unheard, all those not good emotions that we have. Um, so as you can imagine, this shows up a lot in your marriage because, boy, there's some times where all it takes is just that one snide comment and then you're off. And it becomes like a contest of who can hurt the other person more. And that's what it feels like when you have this contempt in your relationship.
Oh, we can't wait to share with you guys the next 3 weeks after this week too. Everybody is going to relate at some point or another on all of these toxic and hurtful relationship patterns or communication patterns that we have. And it's important, I think, with everything in life to recognize something first. It's important to really understand whatever it is, in this case, contempt. What does that really look like in your relationship? What is your spouse maybe doing in a contemptuous way towards you? But we got to be real with ourselves too. How are we showing up in our relationship? I know as we go through some of these, I'll let you guys know where I show up. I know I have shown up really poor when it comes to communicating sometimes. And sometimes it's not even about being upset at Steph or the moment that we're in. It's something else that happened during the day, and I'm just taking it out on her and building this contemptuous portion of our relationship that's this negative, toxic tornado and cycle that we all get into that sometimes is really, really hard to get out of. And let me tell you what, it's a lot easier to get into it than it is to get out of, right?
Well, I also think this can tend to be patterns you picked up from how you were raised too. I think the way your parents treated you, sometimes it's the way your parents talk to you, and maybe in a moment your spouse says something and it makes you think of them, and then all of a sudden it's almost like you're not even talking to them. It's like almost like you're responding to that parent that talked to you that way, or whoever it was. Maybe it was a past relationship that was hurtful, and maybe in that moment it triggered you to be like, oh, you went back to another place where you felt that way, and now you're just reacting out of the emotion that you never dealt with before. And I I bet you this happens more often than we even realize or even want to realize, because it's it's tough to look at that. It's nobody wants to go to those places. Nobody wants to revisit that. Nobody wants to go back to that, which is why we have a lot of this sweep this under the rug and we just move past it and let's just forget and act like it didn't even happen. But that is how we get to these really unhealthy places that are really hard to get out of and dig out of, is when we choose to just sweep it under the rug and act like it didn't happen. That's why we want to really, we're going to share with you guys in a minute about these examples so that you can start recognizing where this is showing up in your relationship. Because it's like he said, the biggest thing is the awareness piece, is just even realizing that you do it, or maybe your spouse
being honest
does it.
enough with yourself that you do.
Yeah, and what it really is and how it shows up and like why, because a lot of us don't even realize why we do it. So these are all the questions you guys have seen on all we talk about a lot. It's just having these questions in your mind as we talk about it and start really thinking about, do I do this? Does my spouse do this? How can we make this better? How can we stop doing some of those behaviors so that, you know, we can get to a better place? Because a lot of times these are the little things that we ignore and brush off and act like they're not really a big deal, but they are a big deal. This one is a big deal.
And the thing is, all of us are sinners. None of us are perfect. So if you're sitting out here and we're going through these things and you see yourself in some of these examples that we're going to give, you got to give yourself a little bit of grace too. And, you know, they say like, it's okay not to be okay. And it's okay if you do some of these things. What's not okay is continuing to do these things when you have the awareness that they happen. Maybe you saw your dad and your mom argue and you saw the way they talked to each other. So it wasn't even something that happened to you or somebody talking to you. It was an example that you saw of two people talking to each other, and you've carried these toxic behaviors into your relationship. You have to at some point say, I'm the one. I'm the cycle breaker. I'm the change maker. I'm the one that's going to make everything different than what I've seen in my generational legacy. I'm the one that's going to stand up, do the work, and be proud enough of myself at the end of my life to know that I've given myself, not only have I lived a good life, but I'm giving my kids a platform and some shoulders to stand on to where they can go take our family to the next level, take our generational legacy to the next level. So you got to give your spouse some grace if they're not showing up, but you also got to give yourself some grace, because living with that shame and guilt of just really being an asshole sometimes isn't good either. And if you're filled with shame and guilt, you're very likely to continue some of the same habits that you form, because you're just in this internal chaos. So we're going to challenge you to not only give your spouse some grace, but we're going to challenge you to give you some grace. And then we're going to show you how to dig out of the hole that you might have dug yourself into in your relationship so that you can get back to a healthy marriage with your spouse.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is the recognition. And then beyond that, how to change it. Or how to, and it doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. This definitely takes time. And just because you correct it one or two times doesn't mean you're always going to be perfect about it. Or you
thank God you said that, because pretty sure I've been pretty far from perfect.
But this is where, but if you have the conversation about it and you at least both acknowledge that it takes place, and then you can move forward and start saying, like, to your spouse when it comes up, maybe you notice it first and you can say, hey, you know, you're doing that thing again.
Well, we're going to get into in a minute how you actually fix the behaviors, how you have the conversation with your spouse and really come out of that season in a really get out of that negative cycle and get into a positive cycle. But I think it's really important, Steph. You and I went through and we made these examples of ways that this shows up. And some of they're not funny. And look, if this is you and I'm acting it out, making a voice behind it, I'm not making fun of anybody. I've probably done it myself, but I can't help it because that's who I am. So let's go through some of these examples of the way contempt looks like in somebody's marriage or relationship.
About to test out our acting skills.
Let's go.
So, okay, here's some examples that we're going to give you. The first one is eye rolling and dismissiveness. So, for an example, you would say, "You're overreacting again." Keyword there, again. Never use that word. "You always make a big deal out of nothing." Again, you're saying, so using those words like again or always, you learn to like remove those from your language when you are having, conversations with your spouse. Like, don't ever use those words because, and it's really hard to do. And trust me, I still catch myself doing it all the time. Because we have a tendency to feel that way. We might feel like it's always happening, but generally, yeah, it might happen a lot. It might happen often, but it's not always, or a never, or, it's generally it's somewhere in the middle.
Well, saying the word always, I've done it so many times. We run late, and Steph, you've been really doing an amazing job at that lately, being more on time. But I would say we're always running late. And I can't tell you how much contempt that would put in my heart and my mind and my soul for my wife because I said always.
This is true.
Because then it's this definitive statement that puts you in this negative place times 10. So you do got to remove that. That's a great point you made, removing those from your vocabulary. So number 2, mocking or sarcasm. Again, guys, I want you to recognize what your spouse does, and I want you to be honest with yourself and recognize what you do. So mocking or sarcasm. Oh, hey, that's a great idea, as always.
There's that word again.
Wow, you're a real genius, aren't you? It's so condescending.
Yes.
And do you think you're ever going to get a positive reaction from being an asshole and talking to your spouse like that? No, I've tried it and it doesn't work. This is called lessons learned. This is a lesson learned from Walt McKinley. All right, let's go to the next one.
Name calling and insults. You're such a loser. You're just like your dad, or you're just like your mom. And in those moments, and I've done this. I have compared Walt to my dad, and not even realizing like that was being contemptuous. Like, I thought I was actually communicating.
She was communicating in a contemptuous way.
I was actually communicating how I felt about like he would get that, but I realized later in hindsight that he had no clue what I was talking about because he didn't grow up with my dad. So guess what? He didn't really know what that meant.
Man, and y'all, like, we might be laughing about this now. I wasn't laughing at all when she would say that. I promise you that. You want to talk about some of the sarcasm, insert sarcasm after she said that I'm acting like her dad. So also number 4, disregarding their opinion. Why should I even listen to what you have to say? So stupid. Your opinion, it doesn't even matter at this. Be quiet. Your opinion doesn't matter in this.
So belittling.
Ooh. You want to cause a real argument in your marriage. Go ahead and tell your spouse, you know what? Your opinion doesn't matter in this.
Well, you want to talk about shutting down someone's feelings and making them feel like they don't matter. Saying that kind of statement.
You're not going to get a hug or some sex that night. That's for sure. Better change that.
The next one is belittling accomplishments. That's not a real achievement. Anyone could do that. You think that's something to be proud of? Ooh. Hurtful. That's for sure.
Ooh, this next one, boy, I tell you, Steph and I do try really hard not to do this, but I have made this mistake, and that's public humiliation. Let me tell everyone about your embarrassing mistake, especially because I told you guys I would be so pissed and we were always late and I was so full of contempt especially when our marriage struggled. And I would just have to say, well, we were late because Stephanie wasn't ready again and she didn't get in the shower on time. And it's such a crappy thing to do. Don't ever embarrass your spouse in public or saying out loud, I can't believe I'm stuck with you. Wow. Yeah. You're next level contempt when you're talking to each other like that. You're basically at the divorce lawyer getting ready to get through it. But I promise you, as we get through these things, like, there's a comeback story to this because Steph and I have done some of this stuff to each other. You're going to find you in some of these moments And there is a comeback story that can happen, but not without the work.
But we all have either done this or we recognize or someone else who has. And it happens all the time.
Right.
This is not like an unusual thing. So the next one is interrupting or talking over them. Like cutting them off and saying, "Can you just let me finish?" Or "You don't understand what you're talking about." That's again, it's kind of like a shutting them down. That's like it's like a control thing, and I see it in a way like you're kind of just like, that's another one of these where it's like, your opinion doesn't matter. Could you just shut up? That's kind of what you're saying. Is like, just shut up. Nothing you're saying is valid or important.
You might as well just be saying, shut the up. That's what you're saying. You just might be saying it a little bit nicer at that moment. But man, can you just let me finish? Well, first of all, recognize, did you just interrupt them in the middle of their thought? And you keep interrupting them, right? So this was speaker or listener technique. We had a conversation, maybe 10 podcast episodes around communication. Speaker listener technique is so huge in this. So if you didn't hear that, go back and find it. Go back and listen to it because it's really important. Okay. So number 8, oh man, passive aggressive behavior. What? I cannot be passive or be aggressive. Don't do the middle thing. I cannot deal with the passive aggressive person.
Oh, but this happens a lot.
Mm-hmm. So when somebody says, well, I guess I'm the only one that cares about this relationship, or sure, go ahead and do whatever you want. Or
now that one is the one that I recognize a lot of us doing.
Or I didn't write this down, and they'd be like, I'm fine.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Hey, fellas, when someone's like, I'm fine, it's a trick.
Well, it's all,
they're not fine.
That's all in the tone. You got to read people's tone and body language, because generally they're maybe saying that, but you can totally read from their whole energy that that's not what they mean.
Yeah. When you look at them and you're like, are you okay? They're like, you know what? Go ahead and go do whatever you want. You sure? You're okay with this? And they got their arms crossed and their brows furrowed up, and they're like, yeah, go ahead. I'm fine. Well, you better rethink that decision in the moment. You better rethink it. But if you go up to them and they're open to it, and they're like, no, go ahead and go out and go have a good time. You sure? Yeah, I'm good. I'm fine.
Yeah, that's different.
That's different. So I like that you said
it's all
body language. Learn how to read it, because I promise you it will help you.
And the next one is ignoring their emotional needs. Stop being so sensitive. You're always making everything about you. But when you do that, see, when you say stop being so sensitive, you're acting like their emotions don't matter. Like they're not allowed to have that emotion. And that's not right either. So they may be sensitive to it for a certain reason that you wouldn't understand because you didn't go through what they went through. So that's where.
Well, and when you say you're always making everything about you, aren't you really just making it about yourself? And this is where you got to be honest with yourself, man. It's so hard when you're in this contemptuous cycle in your relationship to stop and put the mirror on yourself and take the magnifying glass off your spouse and say, are they really making it always about them? Or am I just being defensive right now because I actually know that what I said prior to that was mean, and they're just trying to let me know that it hurt their feelings? You really got to be honest with yourself, because it's not so evident in the moment. And the last one, we're only going to do 10 of them. Displaying disgust. Ooh, when they look at you in their face, their lip is up and they're looking at you and they're just like, I can't stand the way you do that. What? Like, all I did was open the front door. What you mean you can't stand the way I opened the front door? It ain't like I went and farted on you or something. Right? Oh man, or the way they chew. Oh, I can't stand the way you be chewing. There's so much contempt behind that. Now, eat with your mouth closed, because I really can't stand when someone's like, oh man. Or they say this one, you make me sick when you act like that. Man, you can hear the vitriol. Even though we're being funny and joking a little bit, you can hear how The angry tone just comes out even when you're just acting those out a little bit. Because here's the thing, guys, all these statements are so deeply hurtful. They're so damaging to a marriage and a relationship. It's so important for couples to replace this hurtful, toxic, contemptuous communication style and figure out how can you flip the script and make more of a loving, happy, joyful communication style that still moves your relationship forward and still addresses those things that are causing you to start building that contempt.
So yeah, I hope you guys realize after hearing some of those, maybe you recognize some that you do. Maybe you recognize that your spouse does it to you. Maybe you recognize that you were treated that way a lot by someone in your past, and now you have a tendency to do the same thing. I don't know. I just hope that when you heard some of those, maybe some things or some people came to mind that you recognize that behavior and will be like, "Oh, wow. I didn't even realize I did that." Or because I know, like like we just said, like we went through it and we see some that we know we did.
We still will do them sometimes.
Yes, and still do. So it's not like you're going to be perfect. It's not like you can just eliminate it and or just because now you know you're not going to do it anymore. No, it takes a lot of practice and a lot of intention to change those patterns of behavior because it really is. I think it's like a learned behavior. It's kind of, or it's just you never really were taught how to deal with those emotions, and so you just kind of project them on other people. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen there emotionally that it's hard to catch sometimes, and it's like I said, some of these I know for myself, I didn't realize until Walt and I started trying to rebuild and repair our own relationship. And we had to kind of, in some ways, just reflection, but also like helping each other, like sometimes in those moments, catch it. Like,
Yeah.
oh, now I see it. Now I recognize and be like, hey, we said we were going to work on that. Or, something to that effect where you can kind of let them know without being rude back. Because it can be really hard when someone makes a statement, some of those statements like that to you,
Mhm.
it's very hard to not get super defensive or just shut down.
Mhm.
Because, like some of those I was saying, like that's immediately like you're basically telling that person to just shut up or their feelings or opinions don't matter. And in that, you're really going to make that other person just shut down. And then they're just not even going to open up at all or even have any fruitful conversation with you because
Yeah.
they don't feel seen and heard.
And then you get a divorce. It's just how it works. I say that flippantly, but it's not flippant. Divorce is ruining families. Divorce causes so much hardship and trauma on kids, not to mention what it does to the adults going through it, even if it's relatively amicable. So that's why it's so important to recognize this. And it's funny as we go into like, how do you reverse the trend of this? And you mentioned it a little bit, but I thought to myself when you mentioned just building the awareness, that's the first thing is you have to recognize contempt, which is why we gave you guys real examples. And I don't know for those of you guys in their 40s, young boys, GI Joe, knowing is half the battle. And it's so true. But it's only half the battle. You still have to do more. So the first thing you need to do is be honest with yourself, and both partners got to be honest with themselves and say, "Hey, out of these 10 things that Walt and Stephanie went through, crap, man, I'm doing 4 of them pretty consistently. I'm doing 3 of them. Maybe I'm doing all 10 pretty consistently. We've gotten in this negative place. Now that we recognize that we've gotten in this negative place, now it becomes a choice on whether or not I continue, whether or not I allow the moment when I'm triggered to bring out the worst side of me. And your spouse needs to think the same thing. That's why we recommend listening to this podcast with your spouse, because it's going to open up a different kind of dialogue with you guys. But at least you're here, at least you're listening, at least you're making the commitment to your marriage and your relationship, and you're working on it by listening to something like this and saying, hey, I'm going to be better, because no matter what happens, I got to do the work too. So why not just start? And if my spouse isn't ready to start with me, maybe I just need to set the example that moves them in the same direction that I'm in, that I was willing to commit to first. Somebody's got to be the adult and do it.
Yeah, so some of the key points on how to reverse these toxic communication habits.
So that was the first one.
We
Recognize the contempt.
the first one was
Right.
recognizing it. That's big. Because like I said, some of this I realized after having a conversation with Walt. So this is the second one, open communication. And this is what I mean is like when I said the example about, I know I have said to him, I compared him to my dad. And the reason I even know is because he communicated to me, hey, you say I'm like your dad, but I feel like I'm nothing like him. But we had that conversation. And it was because of the way we took time and he explained to me how he felt that then I was able to go back and go, okay, yeah, he's right. That wasn't fair. That wasn't fair of me to say or compare. And so I was very intentional moving forward. And I'm sure I was not perfect. I probably still did it.
At least,
but I tried to be a lot more intentional about not saying that in that way ever again. And like I said, it's not to say that I was perfect about it, not to say that you will be either. It's just to say that it made me a lot more intentional because we had the communication around it and knowing where it was like how he felt about it made me like every time I would feel myself, like if I felt like I was going to say that, I changed what I was going to say. And I found a different way to communicate it to him to make him understand where I was coming from. And what I realized is because we had a conversation about that too, he got to understand why I said it the way I did and that he took it a different way than I intended even. And that is why we have to have that communication is because sometimes we think we're communicating something in a way that makes sense, or you would think it would make sense to them. But if they never experienced what you experienced, or they don't really have the same context around it, they're not going to necessarily receive it the way you think. And that's why you have to talk about it. Because, like I said, I didn't even really think it was, I don't know. I think when I used that example or when I said that to him, I was trying to communicate it without putting the blame on him. I thought I was actually doing a good thing. Totally wasn't. It totally went the whole wrong way because then he was just like, it actually made him furious. And I was kind of shocked. Like, why did that make him so mad? And I didn't. And then he finally explained, but like, I'm really not like, because he's just thinking my dad's personality and they're not. They're very different.
And her dad's a good dude too. So this is not an indictment on her dad.
Right.
But in those moments, the way you were using it to compare me wasn't a negative way. And it wasn't in a positive light, in the good attributes that your dad brings to the table.
Right.
It was in an attribute you felt like was negative that I was exhibiting. And so you were using it to poke me, right? To prove your point because you felt contempt in the moment about that.
Well, yeah, I think I was just trying to explain it of why it upset me. But I was just, but I was upset in the moment trying to explain it. So I think that's part of why I'm so much about the tone and how you say something in your body language too, because I also think back to this other example. Sorry, I'm just going to throw this in there real quick where the person says, they kind of just shut you down when you're talking. And that's one of those ones where as a woman, I think, it just came to my head because we were watching The Handmaid's Tale the other night, and in that culture, on that show, men are definitely over women. Like women are considered, are definitely belittled and treated like you're definitely not equal. And the man in the show did this to the woman on the show, and he cut her off like that when she was talking, and he said, "Let me finish," and was like very abrupt about it. And I see this a lot with men and women. And so I think as a woman, like that one really speaks to me because I feel like I've been treated that way. And that's part of where women just get to where that will make us shut down. and just be like, well, I'm not even going to communicate because I'm not feeling seen and heard. And so what's the point?
Or it just makes them talk over you and keep interrupting you. Okay, so calm and respectful conversations about contemptuous behavior, sharing your feelings and concerns, but also asking your partner to share them, guys. That's what open communication is about. It's not a one-way communication. It's like that full life cycle of communication between you and your partner. And the third thing, so we got recognize the contempt, the open communication. The third thing is eliminate the criticism. Man, like we can be so critical of our partner. The one person we're supposed to love the most on this world. There's 8 billion people on this planet, and you chose one to marry and spend the rest of your life with. And somewhere along the course of our marriage, we start to forget that. And we start to get petty, and the contempt rolls in, and we get really critical of our partner. And our relationship just ends up on a nosedive and a downhill spiral that's really hard to pull out of. But when you can start limiting and eliminating, I should say, the personal attacks and the belittling of your partner, you start to pull, it's like being in a nosedive on a plane, and then you start to pull out of that nosedive. And when you're less critical of your partner over time, guess what? They become less critical of you. It's really weird how that all works together. And that's such a huge thing in doing that. So the third thing is eliminate criticisms.
And next, number 4 is forgiveness. Learn to forgive each other for past mistakes and hurtful behavior. Because holding on to those grudges can definitely hinder your progress. And we know this one real well, because this is what happens where we talked about this negative cycle you get in, because once one of you does it, then it's like, let me hurt you more, and let me hurt you more, and let me, it almost becomes like a competition of who can hurt each other more instead of lifting each other up. And if we don't learn to and this is where, again, the communication comes up, because if you don't communicate these things, you can't work on the forgiveness piece. You have to be able to talk about it, talk through it. A lot of times an apology does need to happen, probably from both of you.
And ownership.
Yes. Right. Ownership. That forgiveness piece is really big. It's really hard to move on and move past things. You can't truly do that in the right way without forgiveness. That's one of those, it's kind of a, what's the word I'm looking for? Like a,
well, I was going to say forgiveness is for you. Forgiveness is so that you can let this chaotic, hurtful thing that's just sitting below your chest, ready to explode out at any minute on anybody who crosses you or anybody who triggers you in the moment. It's about letting that go so that you can live happier and more joyful. There's people who've gotten divorced and are so angry at their ex still that they're talking about it 5 years later in a way that just puts them in a tailspin of negative emotion in whatever moment that they're in.
I feel like you can't move past the resentment it's like forgiveness is kind of like the closure you need to have a fresh start and clean slate and move forward from there. Without that, you can't really do that, because you're still going to hold on to those past resentments and all the little things. You're just going to think back on and feel like it was never resolved. So it's just going to keep coming back up. If you don't, I feel like forgiveness is the closure you need. It's that letting go. You have to let go of that, because otherwise it just keeps coming back up. Every time you get in an argument, how many of us have done that? You get in an argument and you bring up whatever happened. Well, you did this 2 years ago, and I still remember. I'm still holding on to that, and I'm never going to let you forget it. Like, how are you supposed to move on and be different and make it new in your relationship if that's the kind of stuff you just keep bringing up and you don't let go of it? The forgiveness is that letting go. That's the big thing that people need to realize, is it's like he said, it is for you. It's not for someone else. It's not letting that person off the hook or acting like it didn't happen, or it's none of that. It's a letting go process. It's I can truly just let this go and move on and never really bring it up anymore, because it doesn't affect me anymore.
I love that, baby. That was really good. I like how you articulated that. And and I also like that you said it's not about letting them off the hook, but you want your spouse to forgive you for the things that you've done in your relationship too, for the times when you didn't show up as the best version of you. You've got to be willing to extend the same grace to your spouse if you're going to lock arms, commit to fighting for your relationship, and move forward together. Because that's what this stuff is about. This is about having those radical, deep, real conversations with your spouse that allow you to move forward together. And forgiveness is a big piece of that. Okay, so we did recognize contempt, open communication, eliminate criticism, forgiveness. And then I just want to mention a bonus one. You got to maintain consistency. Steph talked about it towards the beginning of this. You're not going to always show up without contempt. There's times when you're going to have a slip of the tongue, when your heart's going to feel a certain way and it affects the way that your body language or your tone and the way you talk to them or whatever it is. But the thing is, challenging yourself to not continue to repeat the same things will build the muscle memory and the resilience to where you don't keep leaning back on old habits. It's about creating new habits. And the only way you do that is through consistency and challenging yourself. And if you catch yourself in a moment where you let it slip and you eye
And
roll,
you will.
or your contempt, like we said, we can still do it to each other, but we catch it and then we'll apologize.
Mhm.
Or we'll have a conversation about it. And then we just keep it moving because we haven't allowed the contempt to be so embedded in our relationship that it's so easy to walk away. We did. And we learned some really hard lessons on how we almost ended up divorced because of it. But because we chose to commit and really never allowed that resentment to build like that again, because we maintained consistency in our relationship since then, we're happier than we've been in our entire 24-year marriage now. And we spend more time together than we ever have. That's what's so important about the consistency. So look, guys, we went through what it is. We gave you examples of how it shows up. And we talked to you about how to reverse these toxic, hurtful communication patterns. Dig in, man. Be responsible for the way that you're showing up in your relationship and stop focusing on how your spouse is. You got to get this stuff in line anyway. So why not just start, recommit, and go all in on your relationship and start watering the grass that maybe you've allowed to start dying and go brown. Stop looking over on the other side of the fence, thinking the grass is greener, because I promise you it's not. And this person that God put you with, out of 8 billion people on this planet, there's one person that you chose to spend your life with. Let that be your guiding light and get back to the way you guys were when you first started dating, only with the wisdom and the growth and the commitment and the ability to trust like nothing else, like you will with nobody else in your entire life. Get back to that place in your relationship, and you won't ever look back on the other side of the fence and think it's green. You'll just keep watering your grass and keeping it looking spectacular. That's what's waiting on the other side of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, be solution focused. That was one of the big takeaway for us from this episode is from now on, when you get to those places where you're feeling that the anger inside, or you have this, you just want to say something snarky or say something rude and, cut down your partner because you're feeling upset in that moment. Think about how you could approach it different in that, well, maybe I could get my point across in a different way. Maybe I can say something that will just make them realize what I'm trying to get them to see. And I just challenge you to try a different approach so that you can find a solution that works for both of you. And it isn't something that's going to cut down your partner or hurt your partner, because that's really not the goal. We talked about it before that when you do that, nobody wins. You're in the marriage, you're a team, you work together. And you want to win as a team. And the only way to win as a team is to find a solution, not focus on the problems. So we just challenge you to really take a step back next time you're in that heated moment and try a different approach. Just try something different and try to be more positive with it, and find something that they do well and you want to, accentuate that and not focus on the negative. And I know it's hard to do. Trust me, Walt and I are constant work in progress on this. I mean, I can tell you guys, even recently, I've seen a lot of growth in Walt because one of the things he committed to me that he would work on was his tone sometimes, because sometimes he doesn't even realize he says something and it comes across a certain way that maybe he didn't intend, but we can't help but feel that way. So, and sometimes even when he catches himself, he'll come back and say, "I'm sorry, I talked to you that way." Like, and I'll tell you guys, that goes a long way. That helps a lot because to me, it's not even about just that he apologized. It's about just, to me, that shows that he's recognizing it. And that's what's important to me, is like that there's awareness there and that he's trying to be better. So that is huge to me. That's all I can really ask, is that it's that growth, you guys. It's just create some awareness, make some small changes, start to grow, start to learn and grow how to be better.
So here's the one question that I ask myself that I want you to ask yourself in this moment. When you're getting ready to reply to your spouse, I want you to ask, does this move our relationship forward? Or am I going to say something painful that makes my relationship go backwards? If you start to ask yourself that question every time you feel this welling up of emotion and chaos and hurt and anger and frustration, and you choose to say things in a way that moves your relationship forward, even if you're being honest about how you feel, you will dynamically change the landscape of your relationship within 2 weeks to 30 days, hands down. And then it's just building the consistency after that. So challenge yourself by asking you that question starting today, starting right after this episode, because I promise you, it will change your relationship. And that's what we're trying to do, is elevate and build legacy-driven marriages. So look, guys, continue to commit to building your marriage and your family. Go to legacydrivenmarriages.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's got tactical marriage tips and real advice that you can start to execute on right now to build that legacy-driven marriage that we all got into marriage for. But look, we're wrapping up the show because we'll just keep on. You know how we do. So until the next time,
get into the arena of your marriage, keep fighting for your relationship, and keep elevating your generational legacy. And we'll see you guys next Tuesday.
Let's go.